So this is about a married couple, for those of you who haven't seen it, and they sort of have a lot of conflict off the top, and marriage is a little on the shaky side. And then there's a hypothetical question that Carole Lombard poses to her husband, which is, if you could ever, if you had to marry me all over again, would you? To which he says no. And then he finds out that they actually weren't legally married, and it goes on from there. So how do you feel about this one, Joel?
Well, I think that's some pretty dark stuff. I think that's
Yeah,
it's a pretty dark comedy, and it just because maybe in our last conversation we talked about The Man Who Knew Too Much 1934 version, and the young
right.
couple with the girl who gets kidnapped. Their humor, those comedy scenes are knives out, and they're very sarcastic. They're very cutting to each other, and then in kind of thinking about Mr. and Mrs. Smith, it's almost as if Dave and Ann Smith, the main couple, are sort of reincarnations of that couple from The Man Who Knew Too Much. And of course, that happened a lot in Hitchcock's movies. He recycled these characters. They get reincarnated from one movie to the next. And so the comedy and the humor in Mr. and Mrs. Smith is like sharp and deadly.
Yeah,
And they're kind of like putting it all on the line. Is you is or is you ain't my baby. Let's throw it down and get real with this.
right.
So I think it was definitely a darkness. And of course, same thing with The Trouble with Harry. Of course, that's some black humor as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It is darker than perhaps people make of it or think of it. I mean, when we think of screwball comedy, we think of the rat-a-tat, the back and forthness, the lightness of it. And he even, I mean, I really love the score in this film because it starts off with like Robert Montgomery just seated in a mess in the morning, and then from there we cut to his wife Carole Lombard in bed. So he's telling you so much in that shot right away, that there's a couple who had a big fight the night before, clearly. But then at the same time, he has this very lighthearted music over it, which again was common, not always. I mean, he either was right on the nose with the music matching the action, like in Psycho, for example. But in this case, he was sort of, there's so much conflict in this film, yet we have this very, lighthearted score. Do you think that worked in this film, or do you think it maybe needed, a little bit more messiness or contrast in the score, or even in the tone of the film?
I hadn't thought of the score, and I'll have to go back and rewatch it. But I think the overall tone is, for one thing, it's very, because it's a screwball comedy and it's very, very quick paced.
Yeah.
It is very rat-a-tat. And I think Hitch was enjoying getting back to those comedy roots, because again, like the comedy scenes in his British films have that same pacing to them. And then he came to America, and he was doing Rebecca and Suspicion, and they're just like very slow paced, kind of lugubrious films. So I think, like, in terms of what I would say in terms of comic timing, it's like absolutely right on the money. I'd put this up there with His Girl Friday or some of the other screwballs from the 40s. And
Yeah.
And but I think what makes this like a very specifically Hitchcock screwball, like only he could have told this story, and that's what makes it, I think, unique and sets it apart. And this is what I think makes it work, is the digs that they take each other at each other. Like, we know from the opening scene that they're really not going to break up, and
Right.
so there's no suspense. Like, we know they're going to get back together again, and so the only curiosity is, well, how is this going to play out? So we're spinning a yarn, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that means that we can sort of like relax and just sort of like go with it and let the story carry us. And I think that's where like the not that I can remember the music, but I could see like the light tone of the music carrying it.
Yeah.
And what it's doing is it's underscoring, I think, and you see this in couples a lot. I think most couples are like this. That we there's a I think a lot of philosophers, Schopenhauer observed that there was, and I forget his language, but he observed that there was a certain sadomasochism in our relationships. And, we try to we want to keep that tension in the relationship by teasing, by maybe pushing each other's buttons. Some people get into physical,
Right.
practices in the basement, right? And all of that is, part of, what it takes to keep the marriage going. If we want to get really deep, we could even think about the god Pan, who is the god of music and beauty and all this joyous stuff.
Right.
Historically, Pan was he was a monster, and he was very destructive at the same time. And kind of messages, you can't have one without the other. So it's very Pan, very
Yeah.
kind of
That's a good point, because you brought up the sadomasochism, and yeah, that's what I like so much about this film, is that it doesn't just have that often romanticized view of love that we see in a lot of Hollywood films, where we only see sort of the early roots of the relationship, with like the falling in love, but we don't spend enough time of those people sustaining the relationship and where their relationship evolves. And here, we see a real complex, a real love and hate, a violence.
Yeah.
He craves this freedom, but at the same time he clearly craves connection, which I thought was so interesting. It's like the With or Without You, the U2 song. It's like he can't live with her, he can't live without her. And on the one hand, it's interesting because he underestimates her, and he thinks that she needs him for money, and you see right away she's like getting a job, she's independent, she's strong. You didn't see that as much with the female characters back then. So I really thought, and he's more, he's arrogant, he takes her for granted. He doesn't really think that she's going to leave, and then she does. But then we see that those complex feelings that she has for him. I mean, she ends up going with another guy who I think she genuinely likes. She doesn't realize that she loves her husband more, of course, till later. But she's conflicted. She doesn't know which way to go. She very easily can turn into against him, her husband, or for him. Even though it ends on a happy ending, it's still, you feel like the next scene it could just spin. And I really appreciated that. And this film is just, it relates so much to, of course, in a screwball lighthearted way, but it relates so much to what relationships are really like. Do you feel that way when you see this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like all of their bickering and their pettiness, there are two things going on here. I think one is they're children. They are kids.
Yeah. That's a good point.
5-year-old. And even like Anne, Mrs. Smith, she's absolutely tied to rules. They've got a rule that they have to ask a question a month, and a rule about this, a rule about that. And he's like, more rules. And by the way, he's a lawyer. So that's ironic, right?
I forgot about that. Yeah.
And so she's got all this very like rigid thinking that she reminds me of a precocious little 5 or 6-year-old girl who knows how to play by the rules and do everything just so.
Yeah.
And as a result, that's fine for a 5-year-old, but for an adult to be that way, that's a recipe for chaos, right?
Right.
And so it's like, but then they're in certain ways, they're kind of like, well, teenagers, because basically what they do is they fight all the time so that they can have makeup sex.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. You saw that so closely. Like when he goes to work, they have this huge fight, and then when he calls her, she was so kind to him. And this is even after that hypothetical question where he says, well, I wouldn't marry you again. But in the next scene, she was totally nice to him. And I think you're true. Like you're right. I mean, they always knew how to spice things up. And I think the relationship that really lasts are the people that kind of organically have that,
Yeah.
you know, so.
And it's a high wire act, you know, because it's also when you're you know, you're playing with knives, and so you can cut, and real injury can happen. But you know, and so the contrast with her male suitor, his partner Jeff, he doesn't have that. He's
right.
The absolute nicest. He's so nice. He's just like mashed potatoes. There's nothing, you know. And
that's why she doesn't like him, right? In the end, like he won't fight for her. He won't fight the husband over her. Like he doesn't have any edge. Like he doesn't have the angst that
he has. No knives. He has marshmallows in his back.
Yeah. It's like she thinks that she should like him. Like it's all subconscious. I don't think at a certain point I thought maybe she was doing this intentionally to make her husband jealous, which perhaps partly true. But I think she honestly thought she was done with her husband, and you know, not totally conscious of the fact that she wasn't, but I think that he's the sort of guy that she thinks that she should like. That's what, you know, that's what the traditional kind of marriage.
The rules that she's following say that she should like this guy. So
exactly.
and so it's like this couple is. I think of the way that she phrases the question, you know, if you could do it all over again, you know, would you still marry me? Is like, it was really carefully written and carefully phrased to I think, point up like a deeper challenge that they've had, or maybe even a problem they have with a lack of maturity. Because what she's asking is again, it's kind of a metaphysical question. If you could time travel back to the period before we were married, what choice would you make? And that opens up all kinds of, you know, ideas to unpack. But now that we've opened up kind of the theme of time and time travel and where we are in time, then that brings up other things, like later on when she's getting ready for their date, and she pulls, you know, the dress out of the closet, and she's trying to put it on, and she hasn't worn the dress in 3 years. And she's like, I don't understand this dress. It doesn't, you know, how did it shrink? She doesn't understand that time passed. And maybe Carole Lombard, who's like this thin somehow. But anyway, and then right after that, they, you know, they go to the Italian restaurant. Was Aunt Lulu's?
Yeah, I forget the name, but I believe it was the first pizzeria in a movie.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, I read that. It was the first, if anyone's watching, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was the first pizzeria to ever be in a Hollywood film.
Oh, that's so awesome. So you got that in the Flushing Toilet and Psycho and
Hitchcock. Yeah, there you go. So he's got everything.
After the pizzeria. Anyway, so, but the restaurant has changed, and they're expecting to see Aunt Lucy is her name. And instead, the neighborhood's gone downhill. It's, you know.
That's right.
Food is terrible, and Aunt Lucy has turned into this cigar chewing dude, and once again, like, time has passed, but they haven't grown with it. They haven't grown with time, so they're still children, you know. In that, I think that's what that's pointing up. Right?
That's a good point. Yeah, you know, I never thought of that. That's really true, and it again, which makes me wonder about that ending, because is it as happy as it seems? Or are they just recycling their behavior, you know? I don't know. Or maybe that's the best way to live.
Well, maybe they haven't grown a bit. Oh, and even like she runs into, is it Mrs. Devers, an old neighbor from her old hometown, and she says something to the effect of, well, I haven't seen you in years, and you haven't changed a bit. You still look like that little girl that I knew 15 years ago. I mean, she almost hits the point a little too hard, you know?
Right.
But like you're saying, maybe, you know, maybe they're perfect just the way they are, and they never need to change.
It could be, yeah.
They're just going to cycle through, you know, fighting and making up, and that's their deal.
But this is another movie that there's some conflicting reports that he says he only did it because Carole Lombard asked him to, and they were friends, that he just photographed it because it wasn't his cup of tea, and so he did it as a favor. However, apparently RKO, who produced it, said that no, he pursued the project. I wonder about that, because it's not, of course, this is a film that is not talked about that much within Hitchcock's filmography. I mean, I've noticed on the Criterion channel, they have it on there now. If you read Hitchcock Truffaut, Truffaut asks him maybe one question about it. Same with The Trouble with Harry. It's so brief. Clearly, Truffaut wasn't that interested in these movies. And so it really makes me wonder, because the only obvious touches are the use of POV a couple of times, and when he gets knocked over, when he meets the women through his friend in that party, when he sees his wife later, as he falls, he uses a POV, and of course the ending with the two skis was just it reminds me of the North by Northwest ending.
Totally.
Yeah.
There's another shot. They're sitting and they're eating. I think they're eating breakfast. It's the beginning of the movie, and so they're still getting dressed, they're eating breakfast, and they're sitting in front of a window, and we cut to a two shot of them from the side for just a moment. So you've got, he's in profile, she's facing him like this, right? And then the breakfast table is between them. And then you've got this big, beautiful white window covered in white, what do you call it? A white, silky window covering.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
With the vertical pleats, right? And it is a carbon copy of the breakfast scene in Topaz between two of the main characters in Topaz.
John Forsythe.
John Forsythe, and Kevin Gore, in Cuba, right?
Oh, yeah.
And he's shirtless, and she's in this gauzy,
right.
But it's the same setup, same window, same curtains. And it just reminded me that, Hitch he liked to take these visual ideas and I think he sort of fetishized them, from film to film. But,
yeah. I mean, certainly those few touches. I mean, perhaps because, he says, well, he just photographed it. And I think really because it's so much about this couple, it's so much about the performance. I mean, the performances are a bit broad, but the timing, the comedic timing was so well done. They weren't really overdoing it in terms of like schmacting or being over the top. I mean, I actually thought they were playing it straight, like I said, a bit broad.
Yeah,
but
right.
At the same time, it's really about that couple. It's about these people. It's about the performances. It's about the relationship. So it's less needed to have those real technical style of filmmaking like you really need in Rear Window or Psycho or North by Northwest, where it's all you have to do is you have these great performances, just capture them. I'm not saying that that's all directors have to do sometimes, but clearly that was the most important thing. So maybe Hitchcock recognized that. I don't know what you think.
No, I think so. And there aren't any like bravura shots. There's
exactly. Yeah.
But I wanted to actually go back and break down that breakfast scene. I'll have to do it later, and I would love to do a shot-by-shot analysis of how he built that scene, because as I was watching it just this last time in prep for this conversation, I didn't count the camera angles, but there were a lot of them, and there was a lot going on in there.
Yeah.
And the way he paced the building of that, and it might be except for the end, it might be the most crucial scene in the movie, right?
You mean early on when she poses the hypothetical question?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
It's almost like that's the murder scene.
Right.
No, because like when she asked that question, and if you could do it all over again, would you marry me? And he thinks, a little bit of suspense, pause, and he says, no. And then we cut to her. She's been playing footsie with him under the table.
Right.
We watch her feet kind of.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yes.
It's a little ankle bracelet.
Yeah.
And Like that was a total Hitchcock move right there.
That's a good point. Yeah. That actually, it's funny because it's so seamless, isn't it?
Yeah,
That I certainly I didn't clock it like, oh, there's a there you know like, oh, he's
it's so natural, you know. You
it's so
don't.
natural. Yeah. It's it really makes me, I know he's had said to Truffaut that he wished he had experimented more with the form. I mean, clearly he was versatile in terms of he did, as we said last time, musicals, and he did suspense, he did horror, he did comedy. I wonder if
Musical.
you know if he had done more stories, like this is something that you'd see like Woody Allen do years later or something. Like I
Yeah.
wonder what he could have done if it was just about the people. I think he had it in him. I mean, perhaps he wanted to stay within what he knew the audience wanted from him. I don't know. It's hard to say, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think it's a wonderful film. It's another movie that when I first saw it, I thought, meh. I saw it about 4 years ago, and then I saw it again. I just thought, wow, this is actually really, really good. More people should talk about it. I think. I mean, I think it's mainly because we just don't recognize it as a quote unquote Hitchcock film. But
Yeah.
it's kind of like when I look at Scorsese. I mean, people remember his gangster films so much, but they forget The Age of Innocence. I mean, he made a lot of films that had nothing to do with people who were in the mafia and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
it's really, really, really good. Do you rate this quite high? Is it something you're quite fond of, or
Absolutely.
yeah,
And I don't believe in ranking, but and I give it a big thumbs up, two big thumbs
yeah,
up. And yeah, in fact, I'm gonna get a little weird on you because I was looking this up right before he called, and Robert Montgomery as Mr. Smith absolutely reminded me of Pete Campbell in Mad Men. Pete Campbell, played by Vincent.
oh,
Remember, he was the
oh yeah, the younger guy, right? Yeah, I know who you mean. I don't know that show too well,
okay, okay,
but I I
yeah,
I know the face. I know what you mean. Yeah,
yeah. And so then I thought, oh, I think Kartheimer had to have gone back to Robert Montgomery to get some, to do some research for the
makes
role.
you wonder. Yeah,
And then
yeah.
looking at his wife, and I don't see her name on the IMDb list here, but she plays kind of the meek and loyal wife, but she's kind of peppery and kind of you know she's got her own kind of thing going, and their whole relationship is on again and off again.
Yeah.
And
Okay. Huh.
I
Makes you
just want
wonder.
to just put it out there.
if
Little
anyone if anyone knows if there's more Mad Men connection with this, let us know.
Yeah,
I've seen very little of that show, so but I can see the actors that you're talking about. Any final thoughts on this one?
oh, just one other. It's a trope. It's a recurring trope in Hitchcock, and I think this can also help kind of reorient, how we approach it. So you think of all the films where guys have fallen ill one way or another, and they have to rely on their female counterpart to revive them. So Spellbound, John Ballantyne has to be saved by his psychologist wife or fiance Ingrid Bergman. Vertigo, Scotty's got an illness, and he's relying on the women. First of all Midge, and then Madeline to try to save him. Marnie, it's reversed, and she's ill, and then Mark tries to save her. To disastrous ends until they get together, sort of at the end. So in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, same thing. Mr. Smith shows up at the mountain cabin, the ski lodge, and fakes his own illness to try to win his wife back. And sure enough, it works. And she nurses him back to health until she realizes he's lying. They get to fight again, woo, and then they get to make love.
Right, and it also reminded me of what you said about The Man Who Knew Too Much last time. Like how they weren't good. They weren't very good to the daughter, and so they had to fight to get the daughter back. And you see that here. I mean, he really has to fight to get her back, and he wasn't being very good with her early on. So yeah, there's always those connections of saving and fighting for
Yeah.
what you want. So That's a good point.
Yeah. And
I
once
hadn't
again,
thought of that.
and once again, the man is the damsel in distress. So
Right. That's
version.
true. Yeah, he's certainly more stressed than she is in this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching and or listening. If you are currently listening to this on the audio version of my YouTube channel and you've run out of episodes to listen to, head over to the YouTube channel where every single episode that I have ever recorded can be found. Go to youtube.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. If this is your first time here on my YouTube channel, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free to do so by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left in just a second. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new episodes or when I go live. Thank you so much, everyone. I will see you in the next episode.